So, following the murders of at least 6 people in Alexandra last week, a community Imbizo has been held where the police minister got to hear directly from residents of Alexandra about the problems in the township. Locals have urged government to address socio-economic issues in the community as well as a means getting down to bringing down the crime levels basically in the township. Let's speak to Senior Research Fellow at the Justice and Violence Prevention Program, Dr. Chandre Gould, who's joining us now to discuss the correlation, Doctor, between crime and the socio-economic challenges in present-day South Africa. The people in Alexandra yesterday said to the minister, if there's any hope of bringing down the levels of crime, they need to see government addressing unemployment, poverty, and the crisis of housing. And as we know, Alexandra is one of the most densely populated parts of this country.
Absolutely, and I think the residents are absolutely spot on. Now, one of the reasons why I say that is because last year, the Institute for Security Study, with our partners in government and our partners from international organizations like UNICEF, came together and we spent time with researchers, with non-governmental organizations, with children, with international organizations, and with government partners. And together, we defined what it means to prevent violence in South Africa. And I hope you don't mind, but I'm just going to share that definition with you because it speaks directly to what the residents of Alex are saying. So we agreed that the following is what we need in South Africa if we are to prevent violence, and that is the whole of society, everyone, working deliberately and sustainably to remove sources of harm and inequality and heal woundedness by intentionally growing an ethic of mutual care, respect, and inclusion to build peace. Mm-hmm. So I think what we hear in that definition is a recognition by all sectors of society that addressing the harms of the past, addressing inequality, and addressing poverty is critical to moving the dial on violence.
Does that then mean, when you consider that we've had a rising unemployment rate, the inequality gap in this country is far from even closing at all at this stage, should we expect then a worsening crime situation?
You know, I think there's a somewhat of a danger implicit in answering that question directly, because if I were to say yes, because I think we are going to see an increase in violence and crime in South Africa for a whole number of reasons, but it's not just because of high levels of unemployment, because when one says that with high levels of unemployment we're going to get a rise in crime, there's an assumption potentially that people who are unemployed are the people responsible for high levels of crime. And I think that's just not fair and is not true. But I think we know that South Africa has been struggling with high levels of violence for a very long time. And we've seen over the last 5 years a reversal of the gains that we did make in reducing the murder rate. And so South Africa's murder rate now is extremely high, very much higher than we would have liked to see it, and certainly at an unacceptably high level. We also see, I think, that we seem to be losing the battle at the moment against gun control. And this is a critical thing if we're going to get violence reduced in South Africa. There has to be better control over guns. And I think there's a real concern that the South African Police Service's shortcomings in relation to the administration of firearms through the Firearms Control Registry, and the failure of the Firearms Control Registry over the last while is one of the factors that is preventing us having good control over the guns. And the other is the fact that many of the guns that find their ways into the hands of criminals are guns that were either formerly owned by police officers, right, or were guns that the police had confiscated and that made were given back to criminals, or are guns that were legally owned by South Africans and that were stolen. So firearm control is something that we just simply have to get right, along with a reduction in inequality and poverty.
And Doctor, I mean, it's one thing to talk about people in Alexandra being killed, as we've seen in the past week, in apparent robberies, right? But as you say, in terms of a firearms control crisis or problem, it's not just, as you rightfully said, poor people trying to make ends meet. You've got, for example, in Soweto, where people were killed, 16 of them shot dead with rifles. Nothing was taken. So that wasn't robbery. That means there's a deeper layer to the crime problem.
Absolutely, and I think that what we've seen over the last few years is a rise in organized crime, certainly. And this is something that with good police intelligence and with good policing, one could address. But weaknesses in police intelligence, I think, have contributed to a rise in organized crime alongside. And so it's not only a weakness in police intelligence, you've got two things going on. You've got a weakness in police intelligence, you've got a weakness in police management and control generally, and you've got corruption, not only by police officers, but certainly that is a problem. So I think that we are yet to know what the causes of the shootings in Soweto, even in East London, even in Khayelitsha over the last month have been about. I think there's been a lot of conversation about why young people are at shebeens and at pubs late at night, but the conversation hasn't been about what are these shootings about in the first place.
Right.
And so there's a strong possibility that these shootings might very well be related to organized crime or extortion rackets, which we know are on the rise in our country. And so this is something that we have to get a handle on as a country.
How much would you say that has to do with the fact that we treat crime, especially the most shocking of crimes, as events? I mean, be it a mass murder at a tavern in Soweto or whatever the next thing is, where in Alex, within the space of a few days, 6 people are said to have been shot dead. And everyone is shocked. The police minister and the commissioner arrive, and another government delegation makes its way to that community, and then we move on to the next one, but hardly ever go back to see what's actually been done post the long list of promises made.
Absolutely, and I think this is where we are going to rely very strongly on journalists like yourself and on the media in general to keep following up and not just moving on from one event to another, because I think it's certainly the case that South Africans are highly traumatized. And these events the numbers start, if you're not personally involved, you just see another event here, another event there. And it's almost as though we've become hardened or numbed to the horror of these events. And it really is a collective trauma when we experience murders like these.
On collective trauma, let's talk about the role of the legacy of apartheid spatial planning and why it makes townships so vulnerable to crime. I mean, we've heard just in the last month or two, officials and communities saying there are areas that are simply near impossible to police because of the way they're laid out and how people are forced to live, almost one on top of the other.
Absolutely. It does make policing incredibly difficult. And I mean, this is certainly apartheid spatial planning has left us with a legacy that is very hard to overcome. And we have had 30 years to address it. And so there's a combination of things here. I think on the one hand, we must not under any circumstances forget that apartheid spatial planning has led to deepening inequality in our country, and that inequality is geographically represented. At the same time, apartheid spatial planning is not an excuse for the situation we find ourselves in the present.
Let's speak more broadly about South Africa's relationship with alcohol and how it then feeds into the many problems that we're dealing with now. I mean, Police Minister Bheki yesterday was talking about how when you drive, at least that's what he says he saw, you drive through Alex, you see so many taverns and shebeens which is contributing, according to the minister, to these high levels of crime. Many of those businesses would have been set up by people who were just trying to put food on the table, right? So they need that as an income, but also we cannot ignore the fact that there is an unhealthy relationship with liquor, whether you look at the rich, the poor, or the middle class in this country.
No question. I think that's well documented and has been discussed to death almost in the media. There's no question that South Africans drink irresponsibly, but I think there's also, and there's no question that the people who open taverns need to earn an income. The question is there an alternative for them? And have we as regulators, as policymakers, as business owners been looking at the alternatives? Well, it's very nice. Alcohol sells well. But the truth is that alcohol certainly does have a strong relationship with violence. What's interesting, though, is it's the combination of alcohol with normalized violence that is the problem. So you might find countries where you have high levels of alcohol use and low levels of violence. And those countries might be countries where people don't resort to violence to resolve conflicts, to overcome the shame of an attack on their masculinity, etc. And so in South Africa, there is a toxic relationship between alcohol and violence, no question.
Dr. Chandre Gould, good to have your time. Thank you.